When I married Jake nearly a decade ago, we were just starting out. Two people ready to build a life together, even if we didn't have a clear blueprint for what that life would look like. Back then, my career as a designer was still in its early stages, but Jake already had a steady, if not particularly lucrative, office job. We didn't have children yet, though that fact occasionally sparked unsolicited comments from family members. Mostly, we were just happy. The apartment we moved into after the wedding wasn't luxurious by any means, but it was cozy and ours. It felt like home. Jake's mother, Lila, wasn't thrilled with me from the start. Her compliments always carried a faint edge. At first I brushed them off, chalking it up to the usual in-law adjustment period. Over time, though, her remarks sharpened. Comments about how we should be starting a family already, how a woman my age really ought to be focused on that, not a career. Jake would laugh it off, gently teasing her about being a bit old-fashioned, and I'd do my best to smile and change the subject. After all, it wasn't worth starting a fight over. Lila's attitude wasn't my only challenge. Jake's younger sister, Sarah, often chimed in with her own brand of backhanded compliments. While Lila's criticisms were framed as concern, Sarah's jabs were more direct. "Still no kids yet?" she'd ask at family gatherings, flashing a saccharine smile. I guess that's one way to keep life simple. Each dig felt like a little pinprick, small but cumulative. Over time, those comments began to stack up, forming a subtle but steady reminder that in their eyes, I wasn't quite living up to their expectations. Still, Jake and I had a good life. We made enough to cover our bills, save a bit each month, and enjoy the occasional weekend getaway. Our home was modest, but it was ours. And when my father passed away, I inherited a small but modern 2-bedroom condo. It wasn't just a property to me. It was a reminder of my dad, a symbol of his hard work and generosity. I couldn't bear to sell it, so I decided to rent it out, carefully selecting tenants who would treat it with the respect it deserved. It felt like a way to honor my father's memory, to keep a piece of him close, even if I wasn't living there myself. But it wasn't long before Lila began hinting that Sarah could use some extra space. Sarah, recently divorced and raising 3 kids, was living in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment. The implication was clear. Why not let Sarah move into our larger place? The suggestion was always framed as a practical, almost altruistic gesture. "You have another apartment now, don't you? Surely you can spare the space." When I hesitated, pointing out that I had tenants and that the apartment was part of my father's legacy, Lila's disapproval was palpable. Jake, ever the peacemaker, suggested we at least consider the idea. I felt torn. On one hand, I sympathized with Sarah's situation. Divorce is never easy, and raising 3 kids on your own is no small feat. But on the other hand, this apartment wasn't just a piece of real estate to me. It was a link to my past, to my father. And Sarah wasn't exactly a model of gratitude. Her snide comments about my lack of children had made that clear. Still, I tried to keep the peace, dodging Lila's pointed remarks and Sarah's thinly veiled criticisms. For a while, I managed to maintain a precarious balance. I kept renting the apartment to strangers, keeping Sarah at arm's length. But it was clear that Lila wasn't going to let this go. She began framing it as a matter of family duty, of doing what's best for Sarah's kids. I started to feel like an outsider in my own home, the black sheep for not immediately bending to her will. Jake, meanwhile, encouraged me to keep an open mind. He didn't understand why I was so attached to the apartment, why I couldn't see the bigger picture. I tried to explain, tried to make him understand that this wasn't just a financial decision, that it was deeply personal. But he didn't seem to grasp the emotional weight of it. To him, it was just a piece of property, and his family's needs outweighed my sentimental attachments. Each conversation left me more frustrated, more alienated. I felt like I was losing not just the apartment, but my voice in the relationship. It was as though the home I'd inherited, the home that meant so much to me, was slipping through my fingers. And then, just when I thought I couldn't feel more disregarded, Sarah herself reached out, not to ask, but to demand. In an email so blunt it left me speechless, she told me to get out of the apartment. No pleasantries, no consideration, just an expectation that I would pack up and move on. It was a moment of clarity for me. I realized that I had been bending over backwards to please a family that didn't respect me, that didn't value what this apartment meant to me. And in that moment, I knew something had to change. The situation with Sarah didn't improve. In fact, it only grew more uncomfortable. While she had never been warm toward me, her dismissive attitude was now accompanied by a quiet insistence that I simply step aside. Lila encouraged her in her own way, always careful to sound reasonable. It would just make so much more sense for Sarah and the kids to have this space, dear. Each time she brought it up, it felt less like a request and more like a statement of fact. Sarah's email had shaken me. I'd always known she thought of me as an outsider, but seeing her words in black and white, words that left no room for negotiation, felt like a slap. "You and Jake don't need so much space," she had written. "You're just two people. Why are you holding on to something you don't even need?" I read that line over and over, trying to process the audacity of it. The apartment wasn't just space to me. It wasn't just walls and rooms and square footage. It was where my father had spent his last years. It was a connection to him, to a man who had worked tirelessly to give me a stable foundation. I felt a rising resentment, not just toward Sarah, but toward Jake as well. He seemed oblivious to the weight of the situation. He didn't see how much it hurt to have his family constantly pushing for something I wasn't ready to give up. When I finally confronted him, his response was as disappointing as I'd feared. "It's just an apartment," he said, his tone casual, as though we were discussing a parking spot. "We have another place we can live. Why not just make it easier for everyone?" "Because it's not just an apartment to me," I replied, my voice trembling. "This was my father's home. It's the last piece of him I have left." Jake sighed, a long, weary sound that made me feel small. "Megan, you're making this into something bigger than it needs to be. We can still keep your father's memory alive, but right now, Sarah and the kids need the space more than we do." I stared at him, trying to understand how he could be so blind to what I was feeling. "Do you even hear yourself?" I asked. "You're asking me to give up something that means everything to me. And for what? So Sarah can stop complaining? So your mother can stop sending me passive-aggressive messages?" Jake shook his head, his expression one of frustration rather than sympathy. "I'm asking you to be reasonable, to think about what's best for the family." "Whose family?" I shot back. "Because it doesn't feel like you're thinking about me, or about what I've already done to accommodate your mother and sister. It feels like you're just going along with whatever they say because it's easier than standing up for me." "That's not fair," he said quietly. "You know how much I care about you." "Do I?" I asked, because right now it doesn't feel like it. The conversation ended there, with Jake retreating to the other room and me left staring out the window, my stomach in knots. I felt utterly alone, trapped in a situation where my voice didn't matter. The more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't just about the apartment. It was about respect, about my place in this family, about whether or not I could trust Jake to stand beside me when it mattered most. Over the following weeks, Lila ramped up her efforts. She stopped by unannounced, bringing Sarah's kids along, just to see the space. They ran through the apartment, laughing and shouting, while Sarah stood in the doorway, arms crossed, a smug expression on her face. "They seem right at home already," Lila remarked, as though the decision had already been made. I wanted to scream. Instead, I took a deep breath and said, "We haven't decided anything yet." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "What's there to decide? It's not like you're using all this space." I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. "This isn't just space," I said through gritted teeth. "It's my home." Lila waved a hand dismissively. "Oh, Megan, don't be so dramatic. It's just a house. You'll be fine in the smaller place." "It's not your decision to make," I said firmly. Lila's smile faltered. "You don't need to be so defensive, dear. We're family. I'm just trying to help." I wanted to shout that this wasn't helping, that it was manipulation, but I bit my tongue. Instead, I turned and walked away, retreating to the bedroom. My heart was pounding, my mind racing. I knew I couldn't keep this up much longer. Something had to give. That evening, I confronted Jake again. "Your mother and Sarah keep pushing," I said, my voice steady but firm. "And I need you to tell them it's not happening." Jake rubbed the back of his neck, clearly uncomfortable. "Megan, I don't know. I don't want to start a big fight with them." "You don't have to start a fight," I said. "You just have to tell them no." "I'll talk to them," he said. But his tone was hesitant, and I had no faith that he'd actually follow through. Sure enough, the pressure from Lila continued. Sarah began dropping not-so-subtle hints about moving dates. Even the kids started asking me when they could have their new rooms. I felt like I was losing control of my own life, like the walls were closing in. The apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a battleground. I couldn't take it anymore. I needed a way out, a way to reclaim my space, my voice, and my sense of self. But every time I tried to push back, I was met with resistance from all sides. One night, after yet another argument with Jake, I sat alone in the living room, staring at a photo of my father. I thought about the sacrifices he'd made, the love he'd poured into creating a home for me. I realized that I couldn't keep letting other people dictate what happened to his legacy. I had to find the strength to stand up for myself, no matter how uncomfortable it made everyone else. The days following that evening were a blur. The tension at home grew so thick it felt suffocating. Every meal was accompanied by an undercurrent of resentment. Jake and I barely spoke, and when we did, it was clipped, surface level, as though we were both trying to avoid stepping on a hidden mine. I could feel the weight of unspoken words pressing on my chest. I tried to focus on work, to lose myself in the day-to-day routine of my job, but even there, I found it hard to concentrate. Lila's voice echoed in my head, her condescending tone as she explained why Sarah needed the space more than I did. Sarah's smirking face haunted me, the way she looked at me like I was a child throwing a tantrum over something trivial. And then there was Jake's silence, his refusal to defend me, to stand beside me, to acknowledge my pain. One evening, after another strained dinner, I retreated to the living room while Jake stayed at the kitchen table, scrolling through his phone. I sat in silence, staring at the blank TV screen, my thoughts racing. It wasn't just the apartment. It was everything it represented. My father's legacy, my memories, my sense of stability. It was all under siege, and I felt like I was fighting this battle alone. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Lila. I hesitated before opening it, knowing it would only make me angrier. Sure enough, the message was another thinly veiled demand. "I really think it would be best if you and Jake moved out sooner rather than later. The kids are getting anxious and Sarah is under so much stress. I'm sure you understand." Understand? Understand what? That Sarah's discomfort was somehow more important than my own? That her kids' anxiety about having a bigger place trumped my grief, my attachment to the home my father left me? I clenched my phone so tightly I thought it might crack. I turned to Jake, still absorbed in his phone. "Did you know your mom texted me again?" I asked. He looked up, his brow furrowing. "What did she say?" "Same as always," I said bitterly. "That we should move out, that Sarah and the kids are more important." Jake sighed and put down his phone. "Megan, I know this is hard for you, but can't you see where they're coming from?" "Where are they coming from?" I snapped. "They're coming from a place of entitlement. Your mom thinks she can just tell me what to do with my own home, and Sarah acts like I owe her something. And you just sit there and let it happen. That's not fair," he said defensively. "I'm trying to keep the peace." "By throwing me under the bus?" I shot back. "By letting them bully me into giving up something that means so much to me. That's not keeping the peace, Jake. That's sacrificing me to keep them happy." He looked away, his jaw tightening. "I don't know what you want me to do. They're my family." "I'm your family," I said, my voice cracking. Or at least I thought I was. Jake didn't respond. He just sat there, staring at the table, as if the wood grain held the answer to a question he didn't want to face. I stood up and left the room, my chest tight and my hands shaking. The following weekend, Lila and Sarah showed up uninvited. They brought the kids, who immediately began running through the apartment, exploring the rooms, laughing and shouting. I stood frozen in the doorway, watching as Sarah opened closet doors and Lila examined the kitchen cabinets. "What are you doing?" I finally managed to ask. "Oh, just checking things out," Sarah said breezily, getting a sense of the space. "This isn't your space," I said, my voice trembling with anger. "You can't just show up and start going through my things." Lila gave me a patronizing smile. "Megan, dear, we're just trying to plan for the move. No need to get so upset." "I didn't agree to anything," I said, my voice rising. "This is my home. You don't get to decide what happens here." Sarah crossed her arms, her expression smug. "Honestly, Megan, why are you making this so difficult? It's not like you need all this room. You don't even have kids." My face burned with humiliation and rage. "That's none of your business," I said. "And it doesn't change the fact that this is my home. I'm not giving it up." Lila stepped forward, her tone sickly sweet. "You know, dear, holding on to this place out of spite isn't going to help anyone. Think about the family. Think about the kids." "Don't you dare talk to me about family," I snapped. "My father gave me this home. It's all I have left of him, and you have no right to come in here and act like it's yours to take." Jake appeared in the doorway, his face a mask of discomfort. "What's going on?" "Your mother and sister are here, uninvited, going through our home like it's already theirs," I said, my voice shaking. "That's what's going on." "Jake," Lila said, her tone pleading, "you need to talk to Megan. She's being unreasonable." Jake hesitated, his eyes flicking between me and his mother. "Mom, maybe you should go," he said finally. "What?" Sarah demanded. "You're siding with her?" "I'm just saying this isn't the time," he said, his voice strained. "This is exactly the time," I said, stepping forward. "Because if we don't settle this now, they'll keep coming back, keep pushing until they get what they want." Lila put a hand on Jake's arm. "Jake, think about Sarah and the kids. Think about what's best for everyone." "I'm thinking about what's best for Megan," he said, his voice firmer than I'd heard in weeks. "She's my wife. This is her home, and we're not giving it up." The silence that followed was deafening. Lila looked stunned, Sarah outraged. The kids stopped running and stared at the adults, sensing the tension. "You'll regret this," Sarah said, her voice low and venomous. "Maybe," I said, my hands trembling, "but at least I'll regret it on my own terms." And with that, I turned my back on them and walked into the bedroom, leaving Jake to usher them out. When the door finally closed, I sank onto the bed, my heart racing. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. Jake had finally stood up for me. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The next few days were like walking on a high wire, teetering between hope and frustration. Jake's sudden show of support at the apartment felt like a lifeline, but it also came with a storm of new emotions: relief that he finally stood up for me, sadness that it had taken this long, and fear that his resolve wouldn't last. I didn't know if I could keep balancing everything without falling. True to form, Lila wasn't done. She called the next morning, her tone clipped and full of barely restrained irritation. "Jake, we need to talk about what happened yesterday." I was in the kitchen, pouring coffee, and I could hear Jake's end of the conversation through the phone. "Mom, we already talked about this," he said. "Megan's not going to give up the apartment." "Jake, you're being short-sighted," she argued. "You're putting her stubbornness above your sister's well-being. This is the family we're talking about." "I know," he said, his voice quieter but still firm. "But Megan's family too. She has a right to keep what's hers." Lila wasn't used to hearing that from Jake. There was a long pause before she tried again, her voice softening. "Jake, I just want what's best for everyone." "I know you do," he replied. "But what's best for everyone doesn't mean trampling over Megan. She deserves respect, and she deserves a say in what happens with her home." The conversation ended soon after that. I didn't say anything as Jake set the phone down, but I caught his eye and gave him a small smile. For the first time in weeks, I felt like maybe, just maybe, we were finally on the same side. But Sarah wasn't letting up either. She sent me another email that afternoon, this time even more aggressive. Megan, it's time you stopped being selfish and thought about someone other than yourself. Your father wouldn't have wanted you to hoard this apartment like a dragon guarding its gold. I need that space for my kids. Just do the right thing. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling. Her words cut deeper than I wanted to admit. It wasn't just the demand, it was the constant insinuation that I was less than. Less worthy because I didn't have kids, less compassionate because I wanted to keep my own home, less of a person because I didn't fit into her mold of what a family member should be. And worst of all, she had the audacity to invoke my father's memory, twisting it to suit her agenda. I didn't reply. I couldn't. Not yet. Instead, I focused on talking to Jake. When he came home from work that night, I told him about Sarah's email and how it made me feel. I'm not trying to be selfish, I said, my voice shaking. This is about more than the apartment. It's about standing up for myself, for my father's memory, for everything that house means to me. Don't you see that? Jake sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. I get it, Megan, I do. But what am I supposed to do? They're my family. I can't just cut them off. I'm not asking you to cut them off, I said. I'm asking you to stand with me, to tell them this is final, that we're not giving up the apartment, that it's not up for discussion anymore. He looked at me, his face heavy with guilt and uncertainty. I'll try, he said quietly. Try, I echoed. Jake, I need more than try. I need you to put your foot down, to make it clear that you're on my side. He hesitated, then nodded. I'll tell them. No more emails, no more calls. I'll tell them to stop. The next day, Jake sent a message to both his mother and sister, making it clear that the apartment was off limits. Megan has decided to keep the apartment, and I support her decision, he wrote. I understand that this may be disappointing, but we need to respect her wishes. Please don't bring it up again. For a moment it seemed like a breakthrough, but Sarah's response came within hours. So Megan's the queen now, and we all have to bow down to her? Got it? Enjoy your precious apartment, Your Highness. Jake didn't respond. Instead, he showed me the message and said, I'm sorry, I'm really trying. I know, I said. Thank you. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. A few days later, Lila called again, this time more subdued. Jake, I don't want to argue anymore. Can we just sit down and talk about this? Jake agreed to meet her, and I decided to go along. I wanted to hear her out, to give her the chance to explain herself without the constant back and forth of emails and texts. We met at a neutral location, a cafe on the other side of town, and sat down together. Lila started off calmly, explaining her perspective. I know Sarah has said things that were out of line, she admitted, but she's been through so much. She's a single mom with 3 kids, and she's struggling. I just thought if we could work something out, maybe even just for a year, it would help her get back on her feet. I listened, trying to keep my expression neutral. I understand that, Lila, I do. But this isn't about not wanting to help. It's about not being forced into a situation I didn't agree to. This apartment is more than just a place to live. It's a connection to my father, to my memories, to my own sense of stability. I can't just hand it over because someone else thinks I should. Jake nodded, adding, and Megan's right. It's her home. She's been clear about how much it means to her. Lila looked at me, her expression unreadable. You know, Megan, I never meant to make you feel like you didn't belong in this family. Maybe you didn't mean to, I said, my voice steady. But that's how it felt. All the comments, all the pressure. It made me feel like I wasn't a real member of the family unless I did what you wanted. And I can't live like that. The conversation ended with no clear resolution, but I left feeling lighter. I had finally said my piece. I had stood up for myself. And Jake, for once, had stood beside me. That night, as we walked home, I looked at him and said, "Thank you." He squeezed my hand. I know this isn't easy, but I'm proud of you. For the first time in weeks, I felt like we were on solid ground. The fight wasn't over, but we were finally fighting together. Over the next few weeks, Jake and I settled into a new rhythm. With his family's attempts to take the apartment behind us, we focused on rebuilding our connection. It wasn't easy. Years of conflict and miscommunication left wounds that couldn't heal overnight, but we both made a conscious effort to listen, to support, and to prioritize each other's needs. One evening, as we were making dinner together, Jake turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "You know," he said, "I've been thinking about everything that happened, and I'm sorry it took me so long to truly understand how much that apartment meant to you. I should have stood up for you from the beginning." I looked at him, surprised and touched by his words. "Thank you," I said softly. "That means a lot to me." He reached for my hand. "I don't want you to feel like you're fighting this alone anymore. From now on, we make decisions together. And I'll make sure my family understands that." True to his word, Jake set firmer boundaries with his mother and sister. When Lila called with another suggestion about the apartment, he calmly but firmly reminded her that we had made our decision and it wasn't up for discussion. When Sarah tried to send another snide email, Jake replied on both of our behalf, making it clear that her behavior was unacceptable. Over time, their messages became less frequent, and the tension that had once consumed our lives began to ease. With the immediate conflict resolved, Jake and I turned our attention to strengthening our relationship. We started spending more quality time together, whether it was taking walks in the park, trying out new recipes, or simply sitting on the couch and talking about our day. I also began seeing a therapist who helped me process the emotional toll of the past year and regain my sense of self-worth. One day, as we were sorting through some old photos, I came across a picture of my father, standing proudly in front of the apartment. I held it up to show Jake, a smile tugging at my lips. "He would have been happy that we're taking care of this place," I said. Jake put his arm around me. "I think he'd be proud of you, for standing your ground, for honoring his memory, and for building a home that truly feels like ours." In that moment, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in a long time. The apartment, once a source of so much pain and conflict, was now a symbol of our resilience and our commitment to each other. It wasn't just a place to live, it was a testament to the strength we had found in ourselves and in our relationship. After the last few months of intense reflection and rebuilding, I found myself on a quiet morning sitting at the kitchen table, sipping coffee and gazing out the window. The apartment felt different now, calmer, warmer. It was as if the tension that had seeped into the walls had finally lifted, leaving behind a space where I could breathe freely again. Jake and I had been through the ringer, but we'd come out of it stronger than I ever thought possible. He'd not only put clear boundaries in place with his family, but had also begun to reconnect with who he truly was. For years, I'd sensed that Jake had been weighed down by expectations that weren't really his own, trying to balance the man his family wanted him to be with the person he actually was. In standing up for me, he had also started standing up for himself. It wasn't just about protecting our apartment or our relationship anymore, it was about reclaiming his voice, his autonomy, and his self-respect. We spent more evenings together now, without the underlying stress that had once filled the air. Sometimes we'd cook dinner side by side, chopping vegetables and chatting about our day. Other times we'd curl up on the couch, laughing over a movie or simply enjoying each other's company. The small joys, things I'd once taken for granted, now felt monumental. Every kind word, every shared glance, every moment of quiet understanding felt like a victory over the chaos that had tried to pull us apart. I also began to focus more on myself. For so long, my energy had been consumed by defending my space, my boundaries, and my peace of mind. Now that the storm had passed, I could turn my attention inward. I started taking long walks again, something I hadn't done in years. I picked up a few new hobbies and even took a weekend class at a local community center. Slowly but surely, I was rediscovering who I was outside of all the turmoil, and I liked the person I was finding. Jake noticed the change in me too. "I'm proud of you," he said one night, his hand resting on mine. "You've been through so much, and you're still here, still standing." I smiled, squeezing his hand. We're both still standing. Our home became a sanctuary again, not just for me, but for both of us. We made it our own, filling it with plants, new art, and furniture that we picked out together. Every piece we added, every corner we rearranged, felt like another step toward reclaiming what had been taken. It wasn't just about decorating a space. It was about rebuilding our foundation, both literally and metaphorically. There were still occasional bumps along the way. Lila would send a holiday card laced with thinly veiled criticism, or Sarah would make a snide remark during a rare family gathering. But those moments no longer carried the weight they once did. I learned how to let their words roll off my back, and more importantly, I knew I had Jake's support. His actions spoke louder than anything he could have said. Every time he stood firm against their attempts to undermine me, it reinforced the trust we were rebuilding. As the seasons changed, so did I. I stopped seeing myself as a victim of circumstance and started seeing myself as someone who had chosen to fight for her happiness. It wasn't just about keeping the apartment. It was about standing up for my worth and my right to live on my own terms. That shift in perspective rippled through every part of my life, from my relationships to my career, and I felt stronger for it. Looking back now, I can't help but feel a sense of gratitude. Not for the pain, but for what it taught me. I learned that boundaries aren't just about keeping others out. They're about protecting what matters most. I learned that love without respect is hollow, and that a partnership thrives when both people are seen, heard, and valued. I learned that my voice, my choices, and my peace are worth fighting for, no matter how loud the opposition may be. Jake and I aren't perfect, but we've come a long way. Every day, we make the conscious decision to choose each other, to communicate better, and to build a future that feels right for both of us. It's not easy, and it never will be, but it's worth it. Our home is no longer just a physical space. It's a reflection of the life we've created together, a life rooted in honesty, respect, and love. And for that, I'm deeply, profoundly thankful. Story 2. My name is Megan Baker, and I am 52 years old. My grandfather started Baker Catering, which my father and I inherited, and I have been in charge of it for more than 30 years. Our business is a family asset. Since my father passed away, I am currently going through a new phase. When he died, he was 75 years old. He continued to worry about the company until the very end. Before he passed away, we spent a considerable amount of time in his hospital room. "I'm sorry I left you a heavy burden," he said in a whisper while holding my hand. "Megan, I might have made you live a life of labor," in a weak voice. "Megan, I still feel bad about that." I clenched my hand around his as I answered, fighting back tears. "No, Father, I made this decision on my own. I'm proud of this business." He smiled and went on, "Please assist Nicole and Kathy as well. I ought to have had a better understanding of them." After his passing, I gradually realized what he had been saying. This business is connected to every memory I have of my father. My grandfather began the business with a used food truck after the war's chaos, and my father developed it into a full-fledged catering service. By the time I took over, it was already known as a venerable establishment in the area. I grew up watching my father, and this business was my everything. I have been single and dedicated my life to my work. I had opportunities to get married and start a family, but the company always came first. In my early 30s, I was engaged to the son of a business partner. However, due to a major store expansion plan, I had to postpone the wedding date multiple times, ultimately leading to a broken engagement. I have never regretted that decision. In fact, that experience allowed me to dedicate myself even more to my work. 2 weeks after my father's death, an unexpected event occurred. Kathy, my father's second wife, came to visit me with her 21-year-old daughter, Nicole. Kathy and my father met at a dance class, despite being over 20 years younger than him. He was captivated by her cheerful nature and nurturing personality as an instructor. Nicole was born to Kathy and her former husband, Billy Smith. Billy, a rising star lawyer, was immersed in his work, often coming home late and spending weekends away on business. The final straw was Nicole's 15th birthday. Billy missed it due to an important trial, and the family trip he had promised was canceled, leading Kathy to decide on a divorce. After divorcing Billy, Kathy met my gentle father, and they eventually remarried. Kathy and I have a relationship more like close friends than mother and daughter. Due to our similar ages, my relationship with Nicole was not awkward, but with over 30 years of age difference, we were more like acquaintances than stepsisters. She often met with her biological father, Billy, so there seemed to be no need for her to build a deep relationship with our family. One day, Kathy came to me with a serious matter. "Megan, there's something I need to discuss about Nicole. She wants to take over Baker Catering." I was taken aback by her words. Nicole was studying business administration, but I hadn't heard of her interest in the company before your father passed. We discussed Nicole's future. Kathy continued. He thought it would be okay to leave the company to her. I sighed deeply indeed. My father had been worried about a successor in his later years. He often muttered about the future of the company, knowing that I was single and had no children. However, this was not a decision to be made lightly. I had taken over the company at a young age, nurtured it with our employees, and grown it into a trusted enterprise deeply rooted in the community. Our efforts to actively use local ingredients had strengthened bonds with many farmers and established unique procurement routes. I tried to respond as calmly as possible. "Kathy, I understand Dad's feelings, but this company is not just an asset. It's built on long-established trust and bonds with our employees. It's not something to be decided easily." I will never forget Nicole's expression at that moment. "I can do it," she insisted, her voice trembling. "It's the last wish your dad left behind." However, the situation unfolded far beyond my expectations. Nicole took my cautious attitude as a complete rejection. "I studied business administration to take over the company," she protested, with Kathy desperately defending her. Then she took a drastic step. At her university graduation party, she suddenly declared in front of her friends, "I've decided not to go job hunting. I'm taking over Baker Catering." The atmosphere at the venue froze. I was dumbfounded and could only stare at the scene. I glanced at Kathy in bewilderment. She plainly felt uncomfortable looking away. I could see her hands quivering slightly as she gripped her coffee cup. That night, in the vehicle on the way home, I faced Kathy while keeping the serenity I had earned from years of corporate expertise. I took a tough position. Peter, who had been my father's driver for 30 years, was behind the wheel. I could sense the stress flowing from him. "Kathy, can you explain? Why did you allow Nicole speak such things while I was opposed to it?" My voice was colder than I expected. Peter gazed worriedly at me in the rearview mirror. After pausing for a time, she began to speak. "Nicole can do it. She is great." Kathy defended her daughter frantically. "She is certainly capable. She's gifted at business. At university, she studied entrepreneurship and majored in business administration. She has a lot of fresh concepts. It has nothing to do with skill." I gave a forceful but quiet response. "My life revolves on this business. It is based on trust relationships with employees that date back more than 30 years, recipes that have been handed down over the years, relationship advice with vendors, and a sizable network that encompasses the families of our employees. I can't just give it to an inexperienced person." Kathy lost her temper. Peter was instructed by her to move the vehicle to the shoulder. Anger trembled in her voice. "You're treating your stepsister unfairly. Since Nicole is not your blood relative, you don't want to give it to her, do you?" "No," I explained, keeping my cool. "This choice is solely based on business. Nicole is inexperienced. Her enthusiasm for this industry has never impressed me. I can't just give up everything my parents and I have worked so hard to build over the years." Peter restarted the automobile without a word. His father had been employed by our organization as well. I carried the feelings of families and generations of workers. I phoned Nicole the next day to let her know what was going on. "I apologize, but I am unable to turn over the business. I was unaware of the commitment made by Dad and Kathy." "What?" The phone reverberated with Nicole's voice. "It ruins my life plan." My mom assured me. For this, I moved to the business school. I didn't even try to find work. How are you going to accept accountability? Things continued to get worse. Billy Smith, Nicole's father, is a well-known local attorney who focuses on management conflicts and business acquisitions. He came to my office a few days after I called Nicole, looking solemn. "I'll be honest, Miss Baker." Billy started out coolly. "Nicole was supposed to take over the business, according to your father. It's a fact. Additionally, there are multiple witnesses. I tried not to show my agitation by answering slowly. Legally, that may be the case. Indeed. Naturally. Billy cut me off. I am aware that you have managerial rights under the law, but he produced a heavy folder of papers. Comprehensive analyses of our company's transactions over the previous 10 years were included. Minor violations of the contract, minor shortcomings in the management of sanitation, and problems with the working hours of employees. Surprisingly, every offense that is typically disregarded was documented. By themselves, these are not significant problems. Billy went on indifferently, but you can imagine, can't you, if I gather a legal team and file a lawsuit. The news media would be thrilled to report on this story. The headline would be about the grim reality of a well-known catering business. Employees' nervous faces were visible throughout the hallway. The company was already deeply troubled by Billy's visit. The livelihoods of our employees and our relationships with suppliers could be in danger if the company's reputation were harmed. Transferring management rights was my decision. Whatever occurs, I have no idea. I hardly suppressed a giggle when I spoke to myself. Nicole will take over the business from me, but there are requirements. Please make sure that the staff's jobs and the recipes my father passed down remain the same. Billy accepted these conditions with ease, but the sorrow with which this accord would start was beyond my comprehension. From day one, Nicole was stirring trouble. She came 30 minutes late that morning. When she stated, "I'm not a morning person," the staff members who had been getting ready since the wee hours of the morning exchanged puzzled glances. She also broke her word that she wouldn't alter my father's recipes. The first problem came up at a meeting with Morris Electric, a long-standing client who had trusted us for more than 20 years to run their twice-monthly staff cafeteria. The executive director, Mr. Morris, noted that the typical stew's flavor had changed. Nicole reacted unexpectedly. "The customer is not always right. This is the new flavor we need to change with the times." The atmosphere froze. Nicole resumed her argument, disregarding the sweaty salesperson beside her. "For efficient administration, it's vital to adjust recipes." The situation in the kitchen was even more serious, even after a senior chef who had been with the firm for 50 years said this sauce is a recipe handed down from the preceding generation. Nicole refused to pay attention. "The cost of this dish is prohibitive. Expensive meat is not necessary. Ordinary meat will do. There are undoubtedly less expensive options for the seasoning." "We need to abandon outdated ideas," Nicole said, dismissing the chef's protests that the quality would alter. "I'm applying the efficiency concepts I studied in business school." She was very assertive in her approach to procurement. She abruptly terminated a 30-year-old local supplier and signed a contract with a less expensive one she discovered online. Without doing sufficient quality checks, she added additional substances. Cutting costs is essential to management, isn't it? The trust we had developed over many years was eroded by each of her statements. 3 significant clients, including Morris Electric, had terminated their contracts with us by the end of the first month. 2 seasoned chefs tendered their resignations in the second month. "We apologize, but this policy prevents us from using our expertise." The worst-case scenario then transpired in the 3rd month. It took place during a big pharmaceutical manufacturer's 50th anniversary celebration, a customer since my father's day, when our business used to demonstrate its expertise. 2 hours after the lunch was served, over 100 people, including executives, arrived at the location. There were reports of the earliest indications of problems. As soon as guests started feeling sick, ambulances were called. In the end, food poisoning symptoms sent over 30 people to the hospital. An inspection by the health department was carried out right away. The outcomes were startling. It was discovered that Nicole had overlooked basic temperature control and that the chemicals she had purchased from the new supplier had improper storage conditions. Our long-standing reputation took a severe hit as the incident was swiftly covered by the media. My personal assets were also in danger of being taken, and the demands for damages much outweighed the company's holdings. Our colleagues' facial reactions were the most agonizing thing. "Next month, will our paychecks be secure?" Their worried tones reverberated subtly throughout the business. Until the very end, Nicole's attitude was the same. "I'm not at fault," she yelled. It was obvious that this would occur if the blame was kept on the on-site staff's lack of oversight. I considered giving a young, unsuspecting woman control of the corporation. Days later, the special meeting room was filled with a solemn mood. Nicole sat alone at the head of the line of lawyers, accountants, and insurance agents. Billy took part as another lawyer, not as her father. Including compensation, the total damages come to almost $2 million. Calmly, the accountant read off the numbers. Only around half of that can be covered by insurance. The insurance representative unfolded the papers. The issue is that there have been verified infractions of fundamental sanitary management rules. Because of this egregious carelessness, we are compelled to restrict the insurance's coverage. Nicole felt the blood drain from her face. Billy studied the papers glumly. "The accountability is obvious," the attorney went on. "It is stated that Nicole changed the supplier on her own, disregarded hygienic rules, and disregarded staff warnings. I'll cover it." Nicole's voice was tremulous but resonant. It was full with resolve. "This accident was my fault. I'm not going to flee." It was the first time Billy glanced up. "Don't help me anymore, Nicole, Dad." Gazing directly at her father, she murmured, "I have to accept accountability for my actions." In the end, the following terms were decided upon. Nicole herself would accrue $1 million in debt and keep up her monthly payments. Nicole was to quit the firm entirely and give me back the managerial privileges straight away. In addition, she formally accepted full responsibility for the mishap. Life will undoubtedly get more challenging from now on. As she signed the contract and walked away, Nicole stated with a blank grin, "I was at a loss when I regained management responsibility, but I started frantically looking for a strategy to recover. Like when I took over the firm 30 years ago, I worked nonstop at 52. I persisted in offering daily apologies to clients while working through the night to create a strategy for rebuilding. But as I grew older, I also became aware of my physical limitations. All-nighters used to be okay to me, but now even a few hours of extra were taxing. Nevertheless, I was motivated by the idea of our workers' lives, particularly the cost of their children's childhood education. This was a difficult time for me to give up. Unexpected reinforcements showed up. Mr. Baker, they were former business associates of my father's. Your dad really helped us out. Apparently, it's time for us to return the favor." One said that a long-standing neighborhood restaurant's female owner paid them a visit one day. Her mom had been a part-time employee of our business as well. "I was able to attend university because your father hired my mother." She cried as she continued, "Now it's our turn to return the favor." Because of the long-standing trust we had established, they assisted us in resolving this situation. The clients consented to postpone payments. Most significantly, banks relaxed lending requirements, and even after the disaster, clients kept doing business with us. Some even made fresh purchases, stating that Baker's firm was the only one they would trust. When my father was younger, he supported the rehabilitation of a firm and gave interest-free loans to a business partner amid a financial crisis. Money comes and goes. "Now I really understand what he's saying," he would constantly say. Their assistance made the road to reconstruction progressively more obvious. The return of the seasoned cooks who had retired was very comforting. They said, "Please let us work under you again." And I started crying uncontrollably. One day, Kathy wanted to apologize to the firm. She acknowledged that she had overindulged her daughter. "I'm so sorry, Megan," Kathy replied, sobbing. "I was concerned about my daughter's future, so I jeopardized your business. Please pardon me." I let out a long sigh. "Nicole." Soon after, she moved out. Kathy went on, her voice trembling. "You've ruined my life," she muttered, and abruptly fled. I touched Kathy's shoulder in silence. It is possible that she was also a victim of this catastrophe. In my 52 years, I've discovered that bitterness and wrath lead to nothing. Rather, it's critical to grow stronger and learn from these experiences. It's all behind you now, Kathy. Let's hope that everyone has a better future. Even during these crucial moments during our journeys, Peter kept driving for me. Every now and again, he would reminisce about the days when my father was president, the difficulties I faced when I assumed management at an early age. and the way the business expanded over time. I was reminded of the significance of this company's past by each narrative. At the moment, the business is beginning to revive. Although regaining lost trust is difficult, we are making good progress with the surviving staff, one step at a time. Younger staff members recently suggested a more stringent cleanliness management system and voluntarily formed a quality control committee. I found their genuine approach to be really touching. This experience has taught me a valuable lesson. A business is more than simply a way to make money. It has a social obligation that impacts the lives of many people and is a priceless heritage that has been passed down from earlier generations. Megan, business is not just an asset, my father used to tell me. It's a solidification of accountability and trust. Those comments now weigh heavily on me. I've begun to give succession planning some serious thought since this event. But this time, I'll refrain from making snap judgments. I'll take my time looking for someone that genuinely cares about this task and feels accountable for it. After a year, the business has not only bounced back, but seems more resilient than it did before to the crisis. Our relationship with our staff has become stronger, and consumer trust is slowly returning. Nicole only recently began playing music. I've heard she works a day job, sings in live venues at night, and lives alone in a tiny apartment in New York. She is gradually beginning her own route while still making monthly loan repayments. Maybe she's making up for her childhood transgressions in her own way. Nicole and Kathy's relationship is still strained. In hindsight, Nicole's conflicted sentiments for her mother could have played a role in her effort to take over the business. My father, Kathy, became very interested in our family company when he remarried. She made weekly visits to the business, avidly went over accounting records, and interacted with staff members. Her response when she discovered an old record stands out in particular. It had pictures of my father grinning with young workers and my grandpa at the company's beginning. What a lovely family. With teary eyes, Kathy held the album and said, "Later on, I found out that her parents separated because her own family had gone bankrupt when she was a teenager. It's possible that this event heightened her desire for a reliable family business." Kathy once whispered, "I don't want Nicole to experience what I did." She worked many jobs to support herself after divorcing Billy, including an office job during the day and a dancing class at night. Even though her ex-husband paid her well, she wanted to instill in her daughter the value of self-reliance. But Nicole could have unintentionally been under pressure because of her desire. Nicole's buddy then informed me that she had been actively involved in local events and performed at school festivals since high school. She didn't tell her mother, though, dreading resistance against the precarious occupation. I looked through Nicole's social media after learning that she had begun performing. There, on stage in a little live house, I witnessed her singing with passion. She sang happily and engaged the audience, and she appeared to be a different person than when she was at the firm. Messages like, "Your song saved me," and "I will come to listen again," were common in the comment area. I still talk to Kathy from time to time. She brought a picture of my father with her when she recently visited the business. She looked at the picture and remarked, "Your father taught me what's important in life." While work is vital, what really counts is living a life that is honest and true to one's heart. I gazed at my father's happy smile in the picture and gave him a meaningful nod. Until the very end, he taught us a lot. At 53, my new objective is to safely transfer our business to the following generation. I want to spend more money on training young workers in order to accomplish this. We recently began hosting monthly study sessions for all staff members, where we covered topics such as the company's history and philosophy in addition to skills. I've learned a lot from overcoming this crisis, including the value of family ties, the responsibility of running a business, and the necessity of pushing oneself at any age. Keeping these lessons in mind, I will keep growing the business, silently awaiting the emergence of a legitimate successor. Until then, I shall take care of this priceless gem that my father created and that I am guarding. Story 3. The fact that Rebecca has just finished high school, which is starkly different from Ashley's, is quite concerning. Mother, obviously disgusted, informed them. My dad nodded in agreement. Yes, he continued, and my sister, who was seated next to them, seemed to like the praises, and grinned. While my sister had enrolled in a respectable university, I was now employed as a recent high school graduate. My sister had given up her time and effort to become an elite, and it seemed that her parents were proud of her. However, I pondered why there was such a sharp difference between us. The explanation was straightforward. I'm a clothes designer named Rebecca. Right now, I'm 26 years old. I grew up in a tiny rural village where I was born. My parents, grandparents, and Ashley all lived there with me. 7 years younger than me is my sister. Ashley was cherished and the center of the family's attention. Because of this, her wishes and ideas were frequently given precedence, and I grew used to being ignored in the background. The way our parents handled us was clearly different. For instance, Ashley would get expensive toys for her birthday, while I would only get one item for my birthday, which was usually a book or educational tool that wasn't really engaging for a youngster. Our parents began going to Ashley's practices and games nearly every week after she joined the soccer team. During middle school, I participated in the tennis club as well, but my parents didn't show up for my last game. Ashley's practice required them to drive her there. My parents constantly put Ashley above me in this way. Even though I wanted to weep at times, Ashley was the one who kept me going. She would forcefully answer when our parents made comparisons between us. That is untrue. My sister is also intelligent. She is fantastic and constantly helps me with my homework. She prepared a little bouquet with flowers she picked from the neighborhood park and remarked, "Well done," a few days after my last match. Ashley showed it to me. She had become a good-hearted youngster. Our grandparents, who shared a home with us, were protective of me and frequently chastised our parents for their actions. However, my grandma died before I finished from high school, and a few days later, my grandfather followed in her footsteps. Ashley was always there for me, but our mother appeared to find it annoying. She started acting more aggressively and menacingly toward Ashley. "I'll have you stand outside if you continue to support your sister." The snow started to fall during the chilly winter months. I was forced to say this since I didn't want Ashley to endure such abuse. "I am no longer a concern for you." After that, Ashley stopped standing up for me and started concentrating on her education and athletics under our parents' roof. Savoring joyful and tranquil days. Our parents were similarly impacted by our grandparents' successive deaths. They said they had no funds and readily rejected my desire to go to college. My parents disapproved of my desire to get a degree in design. Finding employment was my only option after high school. I moved away from home and joined a firm that published a tiny fashion magazine because I still wanted to work in design. I convinced my supervisor to allow me help the designers since I wanted to attempt designing even if my primary job was clerical. It was also a reality check to work in an environment where you were constantly surrounded by the work of expert designers. But that fact just made me more driven, and my goal of being a fashion designer continued to grow every day. I spent all of my leisure time studying and rarely went home. When I went to visit, my parents greeted me with icy remarks. Rather, I dedicated my weekends to studying design, learning specific skills through online classes and other resources. I was eventually accepted as a part of the design team after the corporation acknowledged my hard work. My enthusiastic approach to work struck a chord with the nearby designers, who kindly provided me with helpful resources and contacts. I was able to take on tasks as a fully qualified fashion designer 3 years later. I learned that Ashley was getting ready for her university admission examinations 8 years after I graduated from high school and settled into my work. Her goal was to enroll in the medical school at a prominent private institution. Ashley worked hard every day to maintain her highest marks in the area, and her entrance was all but assured. I wanted to help her in any way I could because I remembered how she had helped me when I was a kid. Ashley got accepted into the esteemed medical university a few months later. I was overjoyed to learn that she had been accepted, and I congratulated her right away. "Ashley, well done! You put a lot of effort into attending school every day. Fantastic." Ashley thanked me politely, but then she raised an issue. In fact, it appears that the medical school needs a gift. It is not required, but according to Dad and Mom, it would be awkward if someone from the nation didn't pay, therefore it would be wiser to do so. However, You are aware that my living expenses and tuition have put a strain on our family's resources. Ashley herself offered to work part-time to help pay for her living expenses. The medical school, however, was a different matter. It was evident that part-time employment was not feasible given the quantity of study needed. However, a gift may be required. In actuality, our mother worked part-time twice a week, and our father was a typical white-collar worker, so our family's income was insufficient to cover it. Even with the tuition alone, attending a private medical school would be quite expensive. I was shocked that they had Ashley bring it up rather than asking directly, even though I suspected they could be banking on my funds. I made the decision to comply with Ashley's request and assist with the contribution and other costs required for her entrance, even though I was becoming increasingly dissatisfied with our parents. Ashley began her new life by renting an apartment close to the campus. I lived not too far from the flat, and I was always willing to lend a hand. Ashley, on the other hand, usually responded indifferently when I contacted her, suggesting that she was enjoying her time at university. Nevertheless, she would often convey requests such as, "Please send me that," or "I want to eat this." I reluctantly made deliveries and gave her the money she needed. Even though we occasionally went out to eat together, we took over the financial assistance that our parents were unable to provide. Throughout, Ashley was distant and glued to her phone, with the exception of meals. A simple was used to rebuff any effort at discussion. We barely have any real conversations since I'm too busy studying. I became more and more confused each time I came across her icy demeanor. When did we begin to drift apart in this way? It also seemed like I made her come to the supper today. I brought up a humorous topic about home, based on Ashley's attempts to shift the mood. "Mom and Dad will probably be satisfied as long as you're doing well, Ashley." Ashley gave me a chilly smirk and abruptly stopped talking when I mentioned this. "Naturally, you're a recent high school graduating designer, and I'm a well-known medical student. Your parents don't care about you. According to her, there are no qualifications needed for the position." Her scathing remarks made my heart ache. "Bi doesn't require a qualification, what do you mean?" I inquired. "That's exactly what I stated. You claim to be a designer, yet these days, anyone can achieve that by searching online. My pals can create websites with ease as well. Doing such a job makes you feel ashamed, don't you? Perhaps you ought to at least obtain a certification. Yes, but a high school graduate could find that challenging. I've put a lot of effort into my career. How can you act like a small version of me? Ashley, how did you fare?" My voice trembled as I spoke. Ashley clicked her tongue and gave me a frustrated glance. "Every day, Mom and Dad say it. They claim that I am exceptional for being accepted into a top medical school, yet it is shameful that their oldest child just completed high school. They advise the aspiring physician to look after her sister in order to prevent her from becoming even more envious. I grudgingly call you and invite you to dinner because of this." Those words brought back memories of our early years. We had always been compared by our parents. Rebecca is awkward, but Ashley is intelligent and trustworthy. Ineffective and foolish. They would say it right in front of me. I felt suffocating as those recollections tore at my heart. Lightheaded by the shock, I dropped my head, believing I was sobbing, to bear the agony. "Well, I'll be going ahead then," Ashley remarked with a gentle snort, and hurried out of the table with her new university life. Ashley had completely changed, and her parents were always complimenting her on how brilliant all of her peers were, unlike anyone in the area. It must have given her even more self-confidence. Furthermore, our parents' daily compliments that Ashley is a true genius and will make a fantastic doctor must have bolstered her confidence beyond that. They kept making disparaging comments about me. Ashley must have been somewhat influenced by the attitudes of our parents. I wanted to celebrate my raise by booking a dinner at a nearby restaurant at the end of the year. Our parents said, "Bring Ashley home with you," when I brought it up to them, and I grudgingly accepted. Perhaps because this was Ashley's first time coming home in a long time, she appeared preoccupied with her studies and training. Our parents almost ignored me when she first arrived, concentrating only on her. At night, they brought together family members, neighbors, and even Ashley's old schoolmates who were still living in the area. A grand party started with a barbecue in the garden and a sumptuous spread of food, including pizzas that had been ordered. Today we are here to announce that Ashley has been accepted into medical school. and will become a respectable doctor in the future," my mother said, grabbing the microphone just as I was about to address the true reason for the celebration. This party was planned to celebrate my promotion. Shocked by my mother's words, I tried to correct the story, but my father stopped me. Then Ashley, energized by the gathered crowd, began boasting aloud. "My mother wants me to come home more, but I'm studying at a prestigious private university, and moreover, in the medical department. So you must understand, it's not easy for me to just come home. In medical school, we often need to cooperate as a team, not just individually. So if I alone return home, it causes trouble for others. Everyone asks me for help when they don't understand something, and it's a bit overwhelming." I quietly slipped away into the kitchen, pretending to prepare the stew. However, Ashley's boastful words still reached my ears. While it was inevitable that our parents and relatives would praise Ashley, it must have been painful for the neighbors and former classmates to hear her boasting, as Ashley's monologue continued, one-sidedly. A neighbor, tired of listening, took the opportunity. When I brought some drinks to strike up a conversation, "By the way, Rebecca, you're working hard in design, aren't you?" But Ashley and her parents immediately shook their heads and denied it. "She's trying, sort of. But not much can be expected. It's embarrassing that Rebecca is just a high school graduate. She's so different from Ashley," my mother said with a hint of disdain. My dad nodded in agreement. Yes, yes. While my sister, sitting beside them, seemed to understand that she was being praised. Displaying a proud smile in the room, there were many people who had only finished high school and were working, as well as parents with children in similar situations. While alcohol and food were being served, everyone tried to keep a composed expression, but it was evident that they were somehow enduring the situation. The only ones who seemed unaware were my parents and Ashley. I couldn't stand the unpleasant atmosphere and tried to leave without saying a word. However, Ashley stopped me. "You come back home quite often, don't you? I can come back with confidence because I study hard every day. But maybe you don't mind because you lack both academic credentials and pride." Ashley laughed loudly as she said this. Even though my father said, "Hey, that's not a nice way to speak," he was laughing a little too. I was speechless at her words and felt anger welling up. "Good for you, Rebecca. You don't have to come back next year." "Gee," I replied with a trembling voice, cutting her off as the people around us looked on with concern. I put down my tray and grabbed my coat and bag while I was getting ready to leave. Ashley and the others were grinning and exchanging looks. "If you're going to say that, I'll do as you say. I'll never come back." A volcanic rage was stirring inside me, yet all the words that came out were cold and emotionless. I no longer had any feelings for my parents or Ashley when I spat out those words. The 3 family members waved happily. "Don't ever come back." On the way to the bus terminal, I was fiercely repressing the need to shout. Returning home had always been unpleasant when I was aiming to be a fashion designer. I barely visited home using my studies as an excuse, but as I evolved as a professional, I grappled with the unavoidable tie between parent and kid. Ashley is much younger and still a student. It might not be simple for her to grasp the struggles I experienced since entering the workforce. However, my parents must have toiled to some extent to raise 2 children, yet because Ashley was intellectually talented, they continued to hail her as a genius while degrading me. Their stupid comments still reverberated in my thoughts. While I felt fury, I also felt a tremendous disappointment pinching my heart. If I appreciated my job, I couldn't sustain such a relationship even if they were kin. I was outraged by Ashley's nasty behavior, yet it encouraged me to resolve to entirely sever off my contact with my parents. Several months after making this decision as a new school year was about to start, I received an unexpected call from Ashley. She has not contacted me at all since then. Additionally, she repeatedly texted, "Please answer the phone." I reluctantly took it up. "Hello, how much is my tuition?" Ashley's voice was a mixture of eagerness and dread. Calmly, I replied, "I covered your first year's tuition, the contribution, and the admittance fee." "No, I'm referring about the second-year tuition. Since it hasn't been paid for this year yet, the university is advising me to do so as soon as possible. For what purpose are you telling me this? On the other end of the telephone, Ashley was speechless. Yes, I had paid Ashley's high tuition out of my funds. However, I just paid the first year's tuition, gift, and admittance fee. My savings had thus dropped dramatically, and I had intended to make further payments over time. Naturally, the tuition for the next years remained unpaid. It was startling that they asked for my tuition after treating me so coldly, as if we had severed our relationship. Wasn't the gift the only thing I was asked to assist with? I was being too helpful, so I simply helped with the tuition. Because they could afford the fees, didn't your parents let you attend a private university, as opposed to when I was your age? Or did you apply without considering the financial aspect? That is untrue. Yet, the fact that many of my students are well off and I have social responsibilities to my parents makes living expenses and travel fees difficult. However, they advised me to ask you since they couldn't pay the fee. I had financial liberty for a very important purpose. To improve my career in fashion design, I had moved to a renowned design business. Now that I had achieved a certain degree of success, my pay had skyrocketed. Furthermore, my pay and bonuses were growing quickly since I was so preoccupied with my job. My parents likely believed from the start that they could cover Ashley's tuition with my assistance because I had informed them of the employment change. Furthermore, since they were aware of the contribution, they most likely believed I could assist with the tuition as well. Thus, the monies that had been intended for Ashley's frivolous spending and relaxation were vanished. But I was no longer able to forgive her. Supporting the tuition would have been simple, but I turned down Ashley's request. I turned down my parents' offer when they reached out to me again a few days later. My heart sank even deeper when they called me and spoke in frantic, accusatory voices. I realized then that I was no longer able to go home. They didn't genuinely want my support as a family member. They were just relying on my money. Without a conversation, there was no justification for taking advantage of my savings. Almost every day, Ashley would call me in tears. I might have changed my mind if there had been even one heartfelt apology, but she always said, "Please pay for my tuition. I'll be expelled if this keeps up. My part-time work and scholarships are completely insufficient. What will everyone think, in your opinion? What if a student as good as me is expelled? When I'm a doctor, I'll repay the loan. Please help me. We're family." There was a pattern to the messages left on the answering machine. One of the statements was unexpected. "I'll also let them know if you're concerned about not being able to return home." I immediately erased these messages from my smartphone after backing them up. After that, I messaged my sister and made the decision to cut off all communication with her. Those who despise others shouldn't be doctors, in my opinion. So I broke off communication with my family and ushered in a fresh spring. Ashley's second-year tuition was somehow covered by scholarships and loans from other family members, according to a relative who had been approached for money. She had to start working part-time because she had no more money to cover her living expenses. Juggling work and the enormous amount of studying she had to do every day, as well as the frequent tests and practices, proved to be more difficult than she had anticipated. Ashley eventually had to drop out 6 months later after failing numerous credits. In addition to helping with tuition, I had been sending money home. I ceased doing so without re-establishing contact after severing ties last year. Ashley returned to our parents, who were struggling financially and barely making ends meet, her pride completely destroyed. Ashley was capable academically, but the money needed to pay for her education had already been spent. She didn't, however, hunt for employment nearby. Instead, she spent her days playing games and venting her anger and isolation. I heard from a neighbor that voices arguing could be heard from the house at night, since our parents had always doted on Ashley. They seemed unable to stand up to her. When I saw my parents in the neighborhood, they always looked exhausted. People around them avoided contact and hardly ever spoke to them. One day, perhaps due to excessive stress, my father caused an unexpected incident on the train during his commute. He made inappropriate contact with a woman standing next to him, was noticed by other passengers detained on the spot, and arrested by the police. Fortunately, a settlement was reached, and it did not turn into a criminal case. However, due to this incident, my father was forced to resign from his job. My mother started looking for work, but having only part-time experience, she was unable to find a stable job that provided a steady income. My parents tried to contact me and even attempted to reach out through relatives, but it didn't go well. The content they asked the intermediaries to convey was reportedly intimidating. The relatives understood there were issues with my parents and told them, "Leave it to us," but eventually began ignoring their messages altogether. As a result, my connections with my family gradually faded, and I was finally able to regain a peaceful daily life. From what I've heard from relatives, there are bad rumors about Ashley, who is now reclusive, and my unemployed father, who looks frightening, causing them to be avoided by those around them. My mother, feeling overwhelmed by the circumstances, has vanished without a trace, and I can no longer get in touch with her. The remaining two, without any means of money, seem to be living nearly like homeless people. If there had been a warm relationship with the neighbors, it could have been somewhat soothing. However, given their prior attitudes, it's tough for them to get understanding from others around them. Meanwhile, I am effectively growing my profession in the design field. Recently, I've been selected to participate in high-profile projects, indicating a huge step ahead. This has encouraged me to finally launch an idea I've been mulling for a long. That plan is to take university admission tests. Since my funds have been improving nicely, I want to tackle this problem after my present project is accomplished, looking to the future. I'm also contemplating creating my own business. I want to develop my expertise not only in design, but also in management. I'm pleased about this new task,